first thoughts were, I'm going up.
And we were in pretty good shape. We had a good handle on things. You know, we had a good plan. And then the South Tower collapsed.
And then all of a sudden we just see stuff just starting to shower over us.
It wasn't just New York City. It wasn't just New York State. It wasn't just Washington, D.C. It was huge. It was massive in Pennsylvania. The entire country was involved in September 11th, and nobody should ever forget that.
Some of New York City's first responders recalling their experiences as those September terror attacks unfolded and planes hit the Twin Towers. Since then, America has changed in terms of national security, and we've witnessed the rise of other threats, such as ISIS and so-called lone rats. But the question remains, are we still at risk for yet another 9/11? To talk more about this, we welcome from Newsmax, New York, the former governor of the Empire State, George Pataki, who was governor at the time of those attacks 15 years ago. George, as always, we really appreciate your time. And according to the Pew Research Center, 40% of Americans believe the ability of terrorists to launch another major attack on the U.S. is greater than it was at the time of the 9/11 attacks. Here's the way it breaks down. 40% say the chances are greater. 31% say the chances are about the same. Only 25% say there's less of a chance. Do you believe 15 years after 9/11, America is safer?
Well, JD, it's clear that whether we're safer or as safe, in any event, we are not safe. We have seen terrorists expand their networks. ISIS now is a global organization. Since September 11th, we've had so many attacks in America: Orlando, San Bernardino, Fort Hood, Knoxville, Tennessee. We know we are at risk. We've seen what's happened in Paris and in Belgium. And it's just tragic that it seems to me too many of the lessons of September 11th that we cannot allow terrorists to have safe havens and training centers and recruiting bases were lost by the Obama administration.
And you mentioned the Obama administration, and of course it has been under Mr. Obama's stewardship the better part of those 15 years. I'm just curious. We've put out a lot of money, $1 trillion, on a variety of countermeasures. But does Mr. Obama really have the will to protect America in the way we need the protection?
I think whether he had the will and lacked the knowledge or the willingness to pursue policies. When you talk about ISIS being the JV, when you draw a red line in Syria for chemical weapons, and today over 400,000 Syrian civilians have been murdered, clearly your policies have failed horribly. And you know what worries me enormously, JD, is yes, we have ISIS, we still have Al Qaeda, we have radical Islam, but it just turned out we gave, I think it's $170 billion or $1.7 billion to Iran, a terrorist state looking to export violent radical Islam, not just in the Middle East, but around the globe. And you just have to say that the Obama-Clinton policies, from Benghazi to the Iranian nuke deal to allowing ISIS to have created such havoc, have failed miserably.
George, I know you remember this firsthand, that once the Twin Towers fell, thousands of volunteers, for example, retired New York police officer Paul Gerachimsik, went to assist those involved in rescue efforts. Now Paul is one of those fighting deadly disease as a result of exposure to ground zero. But despite contracting kidney cancer, he says he would do it all over again. Let's watch and listen.
I'm sure that even if they said that you're doing this on a voluntary basis, which they did, and it's a hostile environment, an unsafe environment, I'm sure the same people that went down there to work would have gone down there to work anyway.
George, we have seen so many first responders get sick, and there was a major debate in Washington a few years ago over how much should be provided for their care. Has Washington, whether the Democrat White House or the Republican Congress, has Washington done enough for those first responders who are contracting these dread diseases?
JD, you can't do enough for those who so heroically rushed to the site after September 11th. You know, this is always a horrible time of the year for me, just thinking of the horror of the people we lost, the friends who died, and just the chaos that was unleashed in New York and Washington and Pennsylvania. But the one shining light was the enormous patriotism and courage with which people responded. Not just firefighters and police officers and EMTs, but construction workers, civilians from every walk of life rushing to that site to help. They were what got not just New York, but got America through this hideous time. And it is now our obligation to help that police officer, to help every one of those who responded with such courage on September 11th. And, you know, these are not anonymous faces. Friends of mine who were down there with me at Ground Zero in the days and weeks thereafter are struggling today with lung illnesses and other illnesses because it was just a horrible environment. You could see the air, you could taste the air, and you knew that this was not where you wanted to be, but it's where you had to be. And there's no question in my mind that they would do it again. These are American patriots. These are heroes. This is what our country is like. It's not government, it's people who have the courage to come together and stand up in the face of unspeakable terror.
George, according to our parent website, Newsmax.com, the House is expected to vote soon on a Senate bill to allow the families of 9/11 victims to pursue a lawsuit against Saudi Arabia. But President Obama has said in the past that he would veto this bill. His reasoning is it would make the U.S. vulnerable to lawsuits in the courts of other nations. Where do you stand on this issue?
Well, I think those who have any sort of responsibility for these horrible attacks should be held accountable. If you can't hold them accountable criminally, or if you can't hold them accountable like Al-Qaeda by destroying every one of them who was involved in this, and that has got to continue to be a priority, then allowing the courts of law to do justice for those who lost loved ones or whose families suffered on September 11th, in my view, is fair. And I understand geopolitics. I think I do better than President Obama apparently has. I mean, he's done everything conceivable to alienate Saudi Arabia, to alienate Egypt, to embrace Iran, to allow Assad to have this relationship with Hezbollah and Iran and Putin. And now all of a sudden he's concerned. I just think it's unfortunate.
George, it may seem almost shocking to talk about real estate news as we remember September 11th, but as I understand it, the One World Trade Center may be for sale soon. According again to Newsmax.com, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is anxious to start realizing, quite frankly, some substantial money for the property. The Port Authority has made no official announcement on a sale yet, but we understand the price tag could be as much as $5 billion. In your opinion, should the Port Authority sell this building, or should it be retained as, first and foremost, a national monument instead of a real estate investment?
You know, this is a very important question, J.D. When we rebuilt Ground Zero, I insisted that this was sacred ground. And that's why when you go there, we have the memorial. We have voids where the two towers stood with waterfalls dripping down to a basin with the names around them. We have the Memorial Museum underneath. But then we have the spiral of office towers, private towers. And to me, it's appropriate for the Port Authority to sell the Freedom Tower. I refuse to call it One World Trade Center. It is the Freedom Tower, soaring 1,776 feet high. That's not a part of the memorial. It's part of the concept that we had, and which I'm so proud we were able to get done at Ground Zero. But the Port Authority shouldn't be in the real estate business. What is important is running the memorial well, running the museum well. These tell the story of the horrors of the attacks, the courage of the responders, and the Freedom Tower shows, in my view, and it's why I insisted that it be built, even though so many opposed it, had to soar to heights beyond the World Trade Center towers, because we wanted to show the world that we weren't going to be cowed by terror. We're proud of our freedom. We're proud of America. We're going to soar to new heights. The Freedom Tower has done that, and it would be appropriate if it were in private hands. That wouldn't trouble me, so long as the commitment to the memorial, the museum, The transportation facilities remains intact.
George, 30 seconds. The one memory from a decade and a half ago on 9/11 that stays with you still.
The families, the tears, the hugs, the just unspeakable sense of loss. 15 years later, I still feel it virtually every day. But I didn't lose a family member. I lost friends. I lost people I was close to. But the suffering of those family members, the pain, the agony that when you've lost your son, if you lost your wife or your mother or your father, I will always remember that. And I will always believe that this country has to be far more aggressive in protecting our freedom. We cannot sit back and allow that to happen again.
George Pataki, as we remember 9/11, we thank you for your reflections.